Welcome everyone to the U.S. Senate Candidate Forum for Equality. Thank you all for being here tonight. You'll hear from 5 candidates running in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. The coalition organizing this forum chose to invite the candidates who polled 1% or higher on the February Marquette poll. The purpose of tonight's forum is to allow the candidates running for U.S. Senate to share their views, opinions, and potential actions on issues important to the LGBTQ+ and allied community. Each candidate will get 15 minutes. While the coalition has developed a list of questions to be asked, each candidate chose which question they would like to be asked first. Before we get to the candidates, we'd like to have each member of the coalition share a little bit about their organization, starting with Fair Wisconsin.
All right. Oh, you can always count on me to make things awkward at the beginning. Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that everyone's here with us tonight. I'm Megan McDonald from Fair Wisconsin, and Fair Wisconsin Education Fund is one of Wisconsin's most respected advocacy groups with a proud history in advancing, achieving, and protecting LGBTQ civil rights and workplace equality through education, movement capacity building, grassroots organizing, civic engagement, research, and legal challenge preparation. In 2005 and in the decade following, Fair Wisconsin led the charge for marriage equality. And most recently, Fair Wisconsin, along with our in-state, regional, and national allies, have blocked continuous attacks on transgender and non-binary youth, advanced protections to help bring an end to the harmful practice of conversion therapy, and fought to expand non-discrimination protections for all LGBTQ Wisconsinites. Thank you so much, and I will hand it over to the next presenter.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Shelley Gregory with Forge. Forge is a national transgender anti-violence organization headquartered in Milwaukee. At Forge, we work to reduce the impact of trauma on trans and non-binary individuals and communities by empowering service providers, advocating for systems reform, and connecting trans individuals to healing possibilities. For community members, Forge offers one-on-one support in connection to resources. We host support and skills groups, and we maintain extensive referral lists to trans-informed providers. For service providers and organizations, we offer individualized, high-quality, trauma-informed training, technical assistance, and support to help improve services to trans and non-binary individuals. Thanks for being here tonight, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Can y'all see me? Okay, cool. My name is Monka Downway. I work at Freedom Inc. I'm the director of community power building. At Freedom Inc., we work with Black and Southeast Asian, low to no income, queer, trans, intersex, women and girls folks in our communities. We work with our folks through times of crisis, primarily dealing with domestic violence and sexual assault, and move them into a space of survivorship through weekly programming and support groups, as well as helping folks move into their leadership of grassroots organizing campaigns. And I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to GSAFE.
Thank you so much. And hey, friends, it's nice to have you here. My name is Brian J. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am one of the co-executive directors at GSAFE, which is Wisconsin's K-12 safe schools organization. For over 26 years, we've worked to create safe and affirming schools for queer and trans youth, primarily through developing student leaders, both through a network of over 250 high school, middle school, and elementary gender and sexuality alliances and similar clubs, as well as leadership class focused on the experiences of queer and trans youth of color. We also provide professional development for hundreds of educators across Wisconsin each year, from Milwaukee to La Crosse, from Beloit to Bayfield. We've worked with hundreds of Wisconsin school districts. And finally, we also work to advocate for policy and practices that support our queer and trans youth. Since 2005, we've been working with Wisconsin school districts to pass local non-discrimination policies in schools that support our trans and non-binary students in particular, and have helped reach about 70% of Wisconsin school districts with these protections. So it's great to have you here, and appreciate the candidates here tonight as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Strout. I am the Wisconsin State Director for the Human Rights Campaign. The Human Rights Campaign is the largest civil rights organization in the country working to achieve lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer equality. The Human Rights Campaign envisions a world where every member of the LGBTQ+ family has the freedom to live their truth without fear and with equality under the law. We empower our 3 million members and supporters nationwide to mobilize against attacks on the most marginalized people in the community. Thank you everyone for being here.
Hello all, my name is Max Claw. I work with the Milwaukee LGBT Community Center. Our mission is to further develop our vibrant lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community in the greater Milwaukee area, thus improving the quality of life for all of us. The mission is supported by the center's leadership in community building, health promotion, advocacy, and communications. We service people ranging age from 13 to older adults through therapy services, support group services. We also do training and outreach to other organizations across the state to provide training and support to professionals to better serve LGBTQ folks. And we also serve as a social and communal space for the community. I will pass it off to the next individual.
Hi, everybody. My name is Casey Wren. I'm Vice President of the Pride at Work Milwaukee Area Chapter. Thank you all for being here and joining us in these great conversations. Pride at Work represents LGBTQ+ union members and their allies. We organize mutual support between the organized labor movement and the LGBTQ+ community to further social and economic justice. We are part of a national network of dozens and dozens of Pride at Work chapters. Our contact info is here if you'd like to join us, and you don't have to be a union member to be a part of Pride at Work. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Faribault. I am the publisher of Our Lives magazine. I'll keep it short and simple. Our Lives is a Wisconsin source for LGBTQ news, people, community, and culture. Since 2007, you can find us online at ourliveswisconsin.com. And on our website, you can subscribe to get the magazine mailed to you for free, or the weekly newsletter, or just browse the website to dive in where you like. And with that, on to the next person.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Ray. Pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the president and CEO for the Wisconsin LGBT Chamber and the Wisconsin LGBT Chamber Foundation, which is our 501c3 organization focused on helping advance the Chamber's mission of building a welcoming and inclusive business community through workforce development, programming, educational events, and other networking opportunities. We invite you to learn more, but we're really excited to be here tonight and be a partner in this effort. And I'll turn it back to the next person.
Okay, thank you so much to all of our sponsors. Now we're going to be moving on to our first 15-minute segment with our first candidate who will be joining us tonight, which is Adam Murphy. Adam, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Adam Murphy, and I'm a small business owner. I owned a software company for the last 18 years. And when I decided to get into politics, I decided to become the type of politician that I wanted to vote for. And so the very first thing that I did in 2019 was to return to college at 47 years old to study things I think politicians need to learn about, which included economics, political science, political psychology, ethics, morals. I did an entire course on abortion, for example. And the important part of that was how all of those things interconnected, how they related. And what I want to emphasize with this tonight, and what my campaign emphasizes, is that in politics we're at a point where we have to rebuild trust. We've lost it. And I don't just mean Democrats and Republicans, right? It's across all populations, all political spectrums. And what I did in 2020 when I ran for Wisconsin State Senate is I talked with people. I didn't spend a ton of time raising money. As a matter of fact, I made 2 phone calls. Instead, right? Thanks for the chuckle, I appreciate that. Instead, I talked with people and I taught people how to talk with people. Democrats and conservatives, liberals, progressives, independents, libertarians. And it worked. We increased Democratic voting by 24%. And that is an incredible number. We took a gerrymandered district from 30% and moved it to 19%. And I think that says a tremendous amount about the people that we interacted with, because it wasn't me, it was them interacting with their neighbors, with the people that they've lost contact with. And I think that all of us here on this conversation have had those relationships where we've lost them. And so that's my goal, is to help us restore some of that and to restore trust. That said, you guys have a lot of questions. How can I help tonight?
Well, Adam, thank you for getting us started off talking about the relational nature of politics in Wisconsin. One thing that's also really important to the voters of Wisconsin is abortion rights and access. And so your first question that you chose to speak on tonight is dealing with that very topic. I will begin the question, and then you have as much time within your 15-minute window as you want to answer this. Natalie Hinchcliffe, an associate medical director at Planned Parenthood, was recently quoted saying, "Abortion is an issue for all people capable of pregnancy, for their partners, their families, and their communities." With recent news indicating that Roe v. Wade is likely to be overturned this summer, which would mean states like Wisconsin would severely restrict access to abortion, how will you work to ensure access to reproductive health? How will you work to address this issue that threatens to roll back civil liberties, civil rights, and bodily autonomy for LGBTQ plus people?
All right. So I mentioned in the intro that one of the things I studied was abortion. I was very fortunate in the courses I took where I was able to do philosophy and political science and constitutional law. So sorry, my phone just dinged. I thought I shut that off. So I've studied it from a philosophical standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from a constitutional law standpoint. And it is, let me say this, it is a really fascinating and obviously incredibly polarizing topic. And I don't think anybody here on this call or anyone listening is surprised at the decision from the US Supreme Court that's apparently going to be coming down this June. We knew that this was the goal and has been the goal for the GOP for a long, long time. They've been working on this literally for 40 years. And so I'm a little disappointed, honestly, in my fellow Democrats, not the people here on this call or on this coming after me, but conceptually, because we knew the strategy was coming and we didn't address it. We didn't fix it. We didn't take the opportunity. We were the nice guys. And that has put everybody at risk. And I don't just mean women, but obviously very clearly women, so 51% of the US population. And they're taking away their humanity. Right? This is an issue of, my wife makes the argument that it's an issue of human rights, not just women's rights. And I can't deny that. I can't argue against that. Right? It is clearly a women's rights issue, but this is the potential for so much more. And I talk, I do a ton of videos. I'm on TikTok. For those of you that are on TikTok, join me over there. There's 125 videos, and I talked about the day that the leak happened for Roe v. Wade and the implications for it, not just for women, because unfortunately we're stuck in a position now where we can't change it, and that sucks. And of course, we've got that 1849 bill law on the books here in Wisconsin, which is likely to be put in force. Despite the fact that sometimes, right, Ron Johnson has come out and said that he doesn't think that it'll happen. Maybe there'll be changes. I don't know why there would be. So it is very, very much putting the lives of your neighbors at risk. And then there's the rest of it, the rest of the implications. And you guys provided 10 questions, and I'm going to roll some of those questions in here, if that's okay, as we talk about this, because this topic of Roe v. Wade and the Supreme Court is so integral to virtually every one of these questions that you've asked about the LGBTQ community. And so Roe v. Wade was about privacy, our right to privacy. And what's been overturned is that right to privacy. And what predated that was our right to privacy for sexuality, homosexuality, our right to privacy for interracial marriage. All of that changed from 1965, for the most part, on. My parents' generation. We can go back further and perhaps look at some others, but really the idea, the constitutional idea of our right to privacy, whether that's sexuality, whether that's sexual identity, whether that's gender, whether that's abortion, has been stripped away. And that is the very literal words that Justice Alito used, right? Was that he doesn't see privacy in the Constitution. And that leads...
Adam, I want to
Go ahead.
thank you for all the context, and also get us back to what are your plans?
Right. Sorry.
If you
what are the plans?
Are you a senator? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. I love this study, right? The theme is listen, learn, and share, and sometimes teach. And that's what we've got to be able to do. So can we do anything about Roe in the immediate? No, we can't. What do we have to do going forward? We have to, and pardon me for this, we as Democrats have to have the balls to do what needs to be done, which means that we've got to change the Supreme Court. Everything that happens, right? So we have to change the filibuster, because without it, nothing changes in the US Senate, which is of course where I'm looking at going. And we have to change the Supreme Court. And it's not just packing the court, and that's an argument that gets used a lot, but it's about making it fair and balanced, but also about making it effective. Because right now, politics isn't effective. And if we're not willing to understand that and make those changes that need to happen to our overall political system, and I make the argument, and other candidates will say the same thing, that right, the filibuster is key to all of the changes that we want to make. Voting rights are key to everything that we want to change. Voting rights don't change unless the filibuster changes. Voting rights get overturned by the current Supreme Court. So we have to be willing collectively to make that change. And so then that requires us as voters, so not just me as a candidate, but you as voters, being willing to communicate. I can't do it all. The rest of the candidates here can't do it all. As many television commercials as we might put out aren't going to be sufficient. So here's what I'm doing, is we're creating video content for you guys to share, to use, to create arguments, right? Not everybody wants to get involved in this battle, and we have to respect that, right? Whether it is the LGBT community, whether it is women, whether it is the Black community. Not everyone wants to share their story. Not everyone wants to fight the fight.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is why, as much as democracy takes all of us, participating, there's also folks like you all, our elected officials, that we, tasked with working to create legislation and different things that'll actually represent our needs and wants as a people.
So let me offer something. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think your approach of like collective community response to the attacks on safe and accessible abortion care is something that's really important. And I would like to move us on to the next question, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, because I know
I
folks
can go for way too long.
folks want to hear from you. And again, I'll just start this off by saying we would like to hear what your plans are and what your approach will be if elected as our next U.S. Senator. So the next question on the list is around conversion therapy. So reparative or conversion therapy is a dangerous practice that targets LGBTQ youth and seeks to change their sexual or gender identities. According to a recent report by the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law, an estimated 20,000 LGBTQ minors in states without protections will be subjected to conversion therapy by a licensed healthcare professional if state officials fail to act. In April 2018, national organizations representing millions of licensed medical and mental health care professionals, educators, and child welfare advocates declared their support for legislative protections against conversion therapy. My question to you is, how will you prioritize ending the incredibly abusive and harmful practice of conversion therapy? And what are your plans to support LGBTQ plus youth who, as a result of discrimination and rejection, face significantly higher rates of homelessness, mental illness, addiction, and other challenges that their straight and cisgender peers do not?
So it's offensive, isn't it? I don't know how else to put it. That conversion therapy is first of all, that it's a thing. And second of all, that it hasn't been outlawed in more states. I think we're somewhere around 20 states. Here in Wisconsin, Governor Evers at least did an executive order. But this is, here's the challenge. We have to change the conversation. We have to figure out how to change the conversation because the GOP has been controlling it. And let me give you an example. They use the term culture war a lot. And it gets used for all of these topics, LGBT, trans, right? Black. And it's not a culture war. It's a privilege war. It is a war of terror. And we need to address that. And I've said I like to teach. And I said that we'll do videos presenting that options for people to be able to share. But the other thing that we have to do, and I think that I make the argument in my campaign that we've got democracy right here in our hands now, is we truly do. But it requires coordination. It requires coordinated effort. And so I think what we need to do as politicians, and so this isn't just the public, right? This isn't just voters. I think politicians need to learn how to put pressure on candidates, or not candidates, excuse me, on politicians in other areas. So if we want to deal with conversion therapy in states where it's not, and of course, obviously, I think at the federal level, it should just obviously be banned, and that would be incredibly simple and easy to do conceptually. But of course, we would be challenged by the GOP. So what we need to do as Democrats is not just talk to our
I want to let you know that you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, cool. So we have to do more than just talk to our own voters because we're in our silo, and we have to do more than just talk to our voters here in the state. We have to address those voters in those districts and in those states across the country where those politicians are opposing sane legislation, where they are actively trying to hurt children. And that's literally what this is. And so that's why I say we need different strategies. We need different tactics. We've been very, very polite, and that's lovely, and it's ineffective. And so we have to do more than just talk with people. We need to actually take it to the voters that can actually make an impact, because we here in Wisconsin can't affect what happens in West Virginia normally, but I believe that we actually can if we start to engage. So that's what I'd like to lead, is that effort. And that's what I'm doing right now, is actually connecting with not just politicians here in Wisconsin, but ones across the country to talk about the issues that are important because they can relate to them perhaps better than I can as a 50-year-old cis white male.
Mhm. Well, Adam, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for these really great insights into your plans if elected our next U.S. Senator.
It was my pleasure.
Have a good night.
Thanks, you guys too.
Thank you. I'd like to now, welcome our next candidate for U.S. Senate, Mandela Barnes.
Hey, sorry about that. I want to thank you all so much for having me today. I am Mandela Barnes, and I'm very proud and honored to serve as your Lieutenant Governor, as proud and honored to be a candidate for the United States Senate. Now, I tell people all the time, my story is a Wisconsin story. I don't come from a wealthy family. I don't come from a well-connected or a political family. I grew up right here in the heart of the city of Milwaukee. My dad worked third shift on an assembly line. My mother was a public school teacher. And those jobs were their tickets to the middle class. And I'm running for the United States Senate to rebuild our middle class and give everyone a fair shot at the American dream. That means protecting our rights and our freedoms and making sure that everyone in this country can live with safety, prosperity, and equality. And that's the work that I've been a part of as your Lieutenant Governor, but also as a member of the state legislature and as an organizer, pushing back against this bigoted agenda of Scott Walker. And it's the work that I hope to do as a U.S. Senator. And I hope to have your support in that effort.
Thank you, Mandela. Thanks so much for bringing to the forefront, your organizing expertise. One huge issue that we're going to have to overcome in the coming years is this attack on abortion access and care. So you also chose a question around that issue for your first question. It reads, Natalie Hinchcliffe, the associate medical director at Planned Parenthood, Hudson Peconic, was recently quoted saying, abortion is an issue for all people capable of pregnancy, for their partners, their families, and their communities. With recent news indicating that Roe v. Wade is likely to be overturned this summer, which would mean states like Wisconsin would severely restrict access to abortion, how will you work to ensure access to reproductive health, to ensure that access to reproductive health care is available to everyone? How will you work to address this issue that threatens to roll back civil rights and bodily autonomy for LGBTQ plus folks?
Well, thanks again. And thank you for that question. This moment is more urgent than it's ever been in my lifetime. Not more urgent than it's ever been, but certainly in our lifetime. Before I was a legislator, as you mentioned, or as I mentioned, and you brought up, I was an organizer. So I believe the way we fight oppression is through organizing. It's through action. And that means turning out voters this election at historic levels to expand our Democratic majority with Democrats who will do whatever it takes to protect Roe v. Wade. And let me be very, very clear when I say Democrats. I mean Democrats who understand the importance of choice. And the first step is abolishing the filibuster. Now, I promise you, I will never let some archaic Senate procedure stand in the way of our basic and human rights, whether it's abortion access or the right to vote. And we all deserve elected leaders who will go to the mat to protect our freedoms. That's what I intend to do. I never imagined that we'd be in this position right now. Most people wouldn't imagine how many of our rights are under attack. And I'll tell you, if Roe is overturned, that is a slippery slope for so many other things that we hold dear. And that's why we have to do everything we can to codify it into law.
So your strategy is to organize to attack the filibuster, make sure that our rights are protected. One thing that we've already kind of gone to the mat for to protect is marriage equality. And that leads us to the second question that you'll be asked tonight. 7 years after marriage equality became a reality nationwide, over half of US states could still deny LGBTQ plus Americans basic freedoms like the right to rent a home or the ability to receive public goods and services simply because of who they love or who they are. The Equality Act aims to ensure basic freedoms and protections for every American in every state. More than 5,000 associations, organizations, faith leaders, and companies have endorsed the Equality Act. If you are elected to U.S. Senate, will you co-sponsor the Equality Act?
Well, I will proudly co-sponsor the Equality Act. And let me tell the folks in the audience, Wisconsin has a proud history of fighting for the LGBTQ plus community. We were the first state to ban discrimination employment on the basis of sexual orientation. We were the first state to send an openly gay U.S. Senator to Washington, D.C. with Tammy Baldwin. And as you've mentioned before, and even with the question that preceded this one, our rights are still compromised, especially with so many regressive individuals in power who do whatever they can, who use fear mongering, who use hatred and scare tactics to keep us divided from one another and demonizing communities in the process. And with the rights of the LGBTQ plus community under attack, we have to fight back. And that's why in the Senate, I will be more than happy to sign on to the Equality Act right away to make sure that the whole community has equal rights to access to healthcare and where people can live free of discrimination. Now, I don't think it'll surprise anyone to hear that most of the time I find myself as the only Black elected official in the room. And throughout my entire career, I've noticed that when there's an issue that impacts the Black community, elected officials tend to leave it up to Black politicians to talk about it and figure it out. And that's the whole problem. I don't believe in that because none of us are free until all of us are free. And real change does not happen until strong allies lend their voice and support communities that they aren't even a part of. That's why I've always been proud to fight for the LGBTQ plus community in the state legislature and as lieutenant governor. And I'm incredibly proud to take this same fight to the United States Senate.
Thank you. Actually, the next question really focuses in on the intersectionalities of being Black and being a member of the LGBTQI plus community. So Black people who identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community face higher rates of police brutality, incarceration, domestic violence and sexual assault, poverty, mental health crisis, and medical discrimination than their white and POC counterparts. Addressing these disparities requires a multifaceted approach that takes into account the intersecting identities held by Black LGBTQI plus community members. How would you ensure that your support for LGBTQ plus rights is intersectional? For instance, Black transgender women are amongst the most victimized, marginalized, and criminalized members of our population. What steps would you take to improve the lives of those who are marginalized in multiple ways?
Well, I'll first start by saying that we have to recognize there are multiple forms of discrimination that block people from having healthy and successful lives. And too often, people face and deal with multiple forms of discrimination, which makes life even more difficult. And while many of us face hardships, we don't face those hardships equally. And that's the thing that is not always understood or taken into account. And as I mentioned, some people have those hardships multiplied. Now, none of our struggles exist in isolation. For example, a lot of people talk about healthcare and LGBTQ issues as though they're different issues. Now, the LGBTQ community has its own specific healthcare needs and struggles, and our policies need to reflect that and take it into account. Same goes for issues like gun violence and hate crimes. Gun violence and LGBTQ plus issues are interconnected, especially for Black trans women who are disproportionately impacted by violence. And so our policies have to take that into account. We also need to recognize the heightened discrimination that Black trans women face that lead to higher arrest rates, that also lead to disproportionate rates of domestic violence, and even violence that ends up in loss of life. Now, ultimately, the most important role of a lawmaker is to be a listener. And I'm committed to continue listening to the voices of communities I may not even be a part of, so I can better understand what the needs are. And we can also understand how we can overcome our common struggles together. Now, these needs differ, but what we have to do is stand up and fight together with each other until we're all free of oppression, discrimination, and whatever else sets us back and keeps us from realizing the American dream.
Yes, and another issue that directly impacts or targets a small population, a small percentage of our population, but has huge negative impacts on us all, are the recent onslaught of anti-trans and LGBTQI plus bills. So more than 300 anti-LGBTQI plus bills have been proposed during the 2022 legislative session. In a March article for NBC, Chase Stragio, the Deputy Director for Transgender Justice at the ACLU LGBT plus and HIV project stated, "It's important for people to pause and think about what is happening, especially in the healthcare context, because what we're seeing is that the state should have the authority to declare a population of people so undesirable that their medical care that they need to survive becomes a crime." How should Washington be responding to the rash of anti-LGBTQ plus and especially anti-transgender bills in states around the country? Has it been doing enough?
Well, I'll start by saying the reason that we see so many bigoted individuals in state legislatures all across the country, even having the audacity to attempt to pass so many of these hateful bills, is because Congress has failed to pass the Equality Act. Now, the Senate has to use every lever of power to pass the Equality Act immediately. Now, every day that we wait is another opportunity for Republicans in state legislatures to continue to strip away civil rights in states across the country. That means abolishing the filibuster, which is something we absolutely need to do in order to enshrine our civil liberties. Now, I know I'm sounding like a broken record here when I talk about abolishing the filibuster or when I talk about turning out to vote. But the fact is, if we lose this Senate race, then that means that Republicans and regressive lawmakers in Congress will have another opportunity to deny us our basic rights. And if we don't show up en masse this November to demand a better future, and I want to remind people too that voting is one thing, but we have to demand more from our elected officials. We have to hold people accountable after they get in office. Voting is just step one. A lot of times you vote for people and they'll disappoint you, and we seem to forget it, or the person we want to get in office will get in office and we don't necessarily pay attention to what they're voting on, or the person we don't want to get in office, we'll just be mad and frustrated without actually holding them accountable. Now, we know that we cannot let these bigoted individuals roll back the clock when it comes to equality for the LGBTQIA community. And Democrats in Washington have to go to the mat for the Equality Act to establish and expand the crucial protections that will quite literally save lives. That is what's at stake right now. And while we fight for the Equality Act, we have to recognize so much harm that's already been done, so much harm that is happening in this moment, in real time, especially in our schools. LGBT youth are already so vulnerable to suicide, and we need immediate action on suicide prevention so we can minimize the harm of these existing bills as we can. And I'm proud to have worked on the Assembly Committee on Education as a member of the legislature when we beat back the bigoted bathroom bill. Very proud.
I just want to let you know you got 2 minutes.
Oh, sorry, for the whole thing or just this question?
For the whole thing. So if you want
all right, well, let's wrap this one up and get to the next one.
Cool. So the last question: reparative or conversion therapy is a dangerous practice that targets LGBTQ youth and seeks to change their sexual or gender identities. According to a recent report by the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law, an estimated 20,000 LGBTQ minors in states without protections will be subjected to conversion therapy by a licensed healthcare professional if a state official does not act. How will you prioritize ending the incredibly abusive and harmful practice of conversion therapy? And what are your plans to support LGBTQ youth who, as a result of discrimination and rejection, face significantly higher rates of homelessness, mental illness, addiction, and other challenges than their straight and cisgender peers? Again, you got about 1 minute to answer this one.
Oh, so you took up a whole minute of my two. So, well, let me first by making a very declarative statement and saying that our LGBTQIA plus youth belong. And that is something that, given all the attacks on their very existence, it is something that I want to make sure is very clearly and plainly spoken out of my mouth. Now, conversion therapy is disgraceful, it's incredibly dangerous, and it can damage a person's sense of self, the mental health, and their own safety for years to come. And as I mentioned, there are quite literally lives on the line here. Our LGBTQ youth are already vulnerable to depression, the homelessness, and suicide that you mentioned. That's why we have to build support, the resources, and the community for our LGBTQ plus youth, not subjecting them to harmful practices like conversion therapy. And it goes back to privacy and a person being able to live their lives as they are. That's why I was proud to support Governor Evers' executive order that banned conversion therapy here in Wisconsin. We can't let young people who live in states that haven't banned conversion therapy fall through the cracks and be subjected to bigoted legislation. So in the Senate, I will wholeheartedly support federal legislation that will ban conversion therapy.
Well, thank you so much for that answer, and thank you so much for your time. That's the time for your segment. Yeah, thanks for joining.
Of course,
Okay, bye. So we're going to welcome our next candidate, Sarah Godlewski.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sarah.
Well, terrific. So I'll just maybe kick it off and give an introduction if that's okay with you.
Yes, please introduce yourself. You've got 15 minutes for your full segment.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello, IHRC. It is so great to be with you today. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Sarah Godlewski, and I'm a proud 5th generation Wisconsinite. I was born and raised in Eau Claire. I am the daughter of 2 public school teachers, and a shout out for anyone on this call that supports public education. And I'm also the proud product of a union family. And something that my parents would always say as public servants is they would say, you know, Sarah, when you see something wrong, you've got to stand up and do something about it. And I will be honest, I never thought that I would be standing here as a US Senate candidate, let alone as your current state treasurer. And just wanted to give you a little bit of kind of background. I'm, proud to serve as your state treasurer. And when I walked into my office, I just want to kind of lay it out for you. My office had wires hanging down from the ceiling. They turned off my Wi-Fi, and the Republicans gave me a pay-as-you-go flip phone as a way to talk to constituents. And so for me, it was they were going to do whatever they could to make sure I didn't succeed. But yet I didn't let them win. You know, one of my first major actions as the state treasurer was overturning a Republican gag order on climate change. And then we started investing in renewable energy projects across the state. Or when the pandemic hit and public schools were literally struggling to address the digital divide because they didn't have access to internet, I stepped up and we provided hotspots and e-learning books so kids didn't have to drive to the McDonald's parking lot. Or we know when communities, their revenues were down and expenditures were up and they were struggling to fund their frontline workers, we stepped up and funded over 300 infrastructure projects. Or when people were struggling to stay in their homes because they were underemployed or unemployed through no fault of their own, we started a foreclosure prevention fund to keep people in their homes. And I'm doing all this work by simply being Wisconsin scrappy. And then I am watching Ron Johnson take a private plane from Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Sarah, I wanna give you enough time to answer these questions.
Of course.
So should we hop in to the questions?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, great. So the first question that you chose to be asked is around fair and safe access to abortion care.
Yeah.
So, Natalie Hinchcliffe, who's an associate medical director at Planned Parenthood, Hudson Peconic, was recently quoted saying, abortion is an issue for all people capable of pregnancy, for their partners, their families, and their communities. With recent news indicating that Roe v. Wade is likely to be overturned this summer, which would mean states like Wisconsin would severely restrict access to abortion, how will you work to ensure access to reproductive health care is available to everyone? How will you work to address this issue that threatens to roll back civil rights and bodily autonomy for LGBTQ plus people?
Well, look, I think what we are seeing right now with Roe is absolutely horrifying. I mean, our state could bring back people to 1849 when it comes to their reproductive freedom. That is even pre-Civil War. And we know that reproductive rights are LGBTQ plus rights, and they must be protected. Because look, we don't want politicians like Ron Johnson making our healthcare decisions. So what's the solution? Well, we've got to, for starters, codify Roe. And I'll be honest, I've been really frustrated with my own party because we've had 50 years to codify Roe into law. And this has been, there have been during these 50 years that the Democrats have had the White House. They've also had the Senate. They've had the House, but yet they simply have chose not to prioritize it and made it more of an afterthought. And so now we're here at the 11th hour, and the Supreme Court's going to overturn Roe in June, and they could literally eliminate 50 years of precedent, 50 years of precedent. And so if they can overturn 50 years of precedent with Roe and criminalize abortion, they can criminalize LGBTQ people. They can overturn precedent with marriage equality. And this is what also really makes me nervous is we're already seeing these attacks ramping up in state legislatures across the country. Look at Texas, Florida, and yes, we've even seen it right here in Wisconsin. I was actually the first campaign in the entire country to go up on the air and talk about what's at stake, because I don't want Ron Johnson to win. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why I stepped up to run for the Senate, because we can't keep treating our civil rights as afterthoughts. We have to ensure that LGBTQ plus people have full access to healthcare. And this includes abortion care and even care related to transitioning, whether that's gender confirmation surgery or more. So for me, what it comes down to is, as your US Senator, I will codify Roe, and I will not let politicians like Ron Johnson or Mitch McConnell make our healthcare choices, because to me, it's about our freedom, not theirs. And I've got news for them. We're not going backwards.
Sarah, I'm glad you mentioned, ways that our elected officials can continue to fight for us. That leads us to the next question, which has to do with the Equality Act. 7 years after marriage equality became a reality nationwide, over half of US states could still deny LGBTQ plus Americans basic freedoms like the right to rent a home or the ability to receive public goods and services simply because of who they love or who they are. The Equality Act aims to ensure basic freedoms and protections for every American in every state. More than 5,000 associations, organizations, faith leaders, and companies have endorsed the Equality Act. If you are elected to the US Senate, will you co-sponsor the Equality Act?
Absolutely. To me, this is a no-brainer, and it would be my top priority to make sure we actually get this done. Because as you said, the Equality Act would extend full federal civil rights to LGBTQ plus Wisconsinites and finally stop discrimination with gender identity or sexual orientation in areas like you talked about with employment, housing, public accommodations, education, what I see with even credit or jury service, or how they can use federal funds. And the one thing that I want to really kind of emphasize with this question is that the Equality Act was first introduced in 1974, and it died in committee. And then it was again introduced in 2015, where it once again died in committee. And we have seen it again and again die in committee. And look, we had good news this year because the House did pass it, but yet it died in the Senate. And to me, this is completely unacceptable. And it's one of the reasons why I've talked about getting rid of the filibuster, because I believe if we would get rid of the filibuster, we could pass the Equality Act. And, I just want to kind of also link this back to the question that we talked about earlier, because we're seeing right now the Republican playbook on this with abortion and how we need to codify LGBTQ rights, just like we have to codify Roe, and just like we honestly have to codify marriage equality. We've got to codify everything, because if the Republicans can overturn 50 years of precedent with Roe and criminalize abortion, they can once again criminalize LGBTQ people. And we're seeing these attacks, and they can then criminalize marriage equality. And so this to me is a major step that we have to take in order to protect those important civil rights. And we've got to get the Equality Act done.
Thank you so much for your comments around that. I think it's, something really important that you're saying about let's not have 50 years of progress be so easily overturned. And this is so true in the next area that we're about to talk about as well. As Black people who identify as members of the LGBTQI plus community face higher rates of police brutality, incarceration, domestic violence and sexual assault, poverty, mental health crises, and medical discrimination than their white and POC counterparts. Addressing these disparities requires a multifaceted approach that takes into account the intersecting identities held by Black LGBTQI plus community members. How would you ensure that your support for LGBTQ plus rights is intersectional? For instance, Black transgender women are among the most victimized, marginalized, and criminalized members of our population. What steps would you take to improve the lives of those who are marginalized in multiple ways?
Well, for starters, I know that it's important to put in the work and educate myself on these intersectional issues. And I know it's important to do my own research and not to rely on marginalized groups to be experts. That's why when I actually ran for state treasurer, I did my research and then I proactively reached out to HRC to talk about how my role as the state's chief financial officer can actually help address credit discrimination. And because that was something that was on the books in Wisconsin. And look, we know that the LGBTQ plus community is not a one size fits all. It's really important to understand the layers of reality that LGBTQ people face. And I also recognize ways in which these social identities can impact one's access to services and support, whether that's legal protections, healthcare, or as you mentioned, housing. But the other thing that I really have been leaning in on that I think is incredibly important is it's about listening and centering voices from the ground up and centering the priorities of people most impacted by these inequities and bringing as many voices to the table as possible. And, this is something that I've really tried to focus on as my work as state treasurer, really meeting people where they are and hearing about their own concerns, particularly my work with housing and homeownership. Because we know right now, LGBTQ plus Americans can be evicted, they can be denied home loans, and they can even be turned away from rental properties just because who they are.
Yep.
And I remember seeing this, it was something like 40% of Black trans people have said that they are experiencing homelessness at some point of their lives, which is actually 5 times the rate of the general US population. And so, I'm proud of my work that we've done to start addressing homeownership with Take Root Wisconsin and the Help for Homeowners program, but we need to do more. And so that's why I think we've got to do everything from the Equality Act to end discrimination with housing and credit. But it goes back to exactly kind of where we started is, I've got to put in the work, we've got to do research, then we've got to reach out, we've got to listen, and then together we've got to fight to make sure everybody has a voice and we're fighting for policies that work for everybody and lifting up those in need.
Well, thank you so much for your answer around that, especially the, really insisting upon folks needing to do the research and educate themselves. So I want to let you know you have 2 minutes left. Do you have,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, anything
Time
else
flies when you're having fun.
Yes, anything else you want to say to just wrap up your time with us?
Yeah, look, I think that we have seen how 2022 has been one of the worst years on record when it comes for anti-LGBTQ bills, especially targeting the trans community. And so for me, this is emergency. The rights of LGBTQ plus people, including the families who love them, continue to be undermined by state legislatures, by courtrooms, and even the federal government. And we know these attacks won't end. And that's why we've got to stand up and fight back. And honestly, I believe Washington has not done enough on these issues, whether it's everything from conversion therapy to mental health of LGBTQ individuals or trans folks, to the Equality Act. And we know we've got to start passing legislation at the federal level to combat these things. And it just, to me, goes back to these basic things, which is it's about freedom, it's about dignity, and it's about privacy. And honestly, I'm not going to back down until people are free to be who they are and love who they want to love and live without fear. So I don't think that's too much to ask for. So I really appreciate all of you for HRC organizing this and for us to share opportunities on these important issues. And if you have any questions about me or my work, you should visit sarahforwisconsin.com. Again, that's sarahforwisconsin.com. And just want to also quick note that it's Mental Health Month, and we actually just released our mental health plan about ways in which we can help address the mental health crisis that we are facing in this country.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for answering these questions, and you have a great night. We're gonna go ahead and welcome our fourth candidate of the night, Alex Lasry.
Well, thank you, and thank you guys so much for having me. This is a great forum to be able to talk about a lot of important issues that are going to be at the center of this campaign, and also the center of what we're fighting for over the next, hopefully the next 4, 5, 10 years. Right, this is going to be generational issues that we're dealing with. I'm Alex Lasry. I was the senior vice president for the NBA champion Milwaukee Bucks before I got in here, and I got in this race because I thought we just needed a change in Washington, right? Whether it's his conspiracy theorizing or general indifference to the job. Ron Johnson has shown us time and time again that he's not up to the task of being our US Senator. And that's been a problem for us because that means for 12 years, we've only had one person in Washington fighting on our behalf and fighting for our interests. And that's why I'm in this race, because I want to give Tammy a real partner in DC to bring some change and real results for the people of Wisconsin. And that to me is why I think I'd be the best candidate to go to Washington, because what I've always said is if you want to know what someone's going to do when they get to Washington, you got to look at what they've done. And I've got a track record of real results and having meaningful accomplishments for the people of Wisconsin. Right? We've raised wages. We've created thousands of good paying union jobs. We've been on the front lines of racial and social justice and voting rights. We were, one of the first, I think, if not the first arena to have gender neutral bathrooms, making sure that we were one of the first teams in the NBA with a Pride Night, making sure that we were bringing national attention to a lot of, I think, the most important issues and trying to lead as a great corporate citizen. And I want to be able to take what I did there, those values, those accomplishments, and those real results, and be able to bring them to Washington to deliver for you. This isn't just about fighting. This isn't just about, about being there. This is about actual delivering and making sure that we're getting some real results for the people of Wisconsin. And so I just want to say thank you. It means so much to be here, and looking forward to this conversation.
Well, Alex, we're gonna start off these questions with one that you chose, which is around conversion therapy. So the reparative or conversion therapy is a dangerous practice that targets LGBTQ youth and seeks to change their sexual or gender identities. According to a recent report by the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law, an estimated 20,000 LGBTQ minors in states without protections will be subjected to conversion therapy by a licensed healthcare professional if state officials fail to act. In April 2018, national organizations representing millions of licensed medical and mental health care professionals, educators, and child welfare advocates declared their support for legislative protections against conversion therapy. How will you prioritize ending the incredibly abusive and harmful practice of conversion therapy? And what are your plans to support LGBTQ plus youth who, as a result of discrimination and rejection, face significantly higher rates of homelessness, mental illness, addiction, and other challenges than their straight and cisgender peers?
Yeah, this is, I chose this question for a reason, because I think this is, one of the, most important things that we can attack, especially on the federal level, right? This is one of those things where we actually need a lot more federal intervention and federal laws around this. I'm proud to be supported by Mayor Cavalier Johnson, who was a leading figure on banning conversion therapy here in Milwaukee. But this is not something we're going to be able to do, city by city, town by town, state by state, right? This is something that we need to do at the federal level to make sure that everyone is protected. One of the biggest things the federal government can do is make sure that the states aren't infringing on, on the rights of everyone, and making sure that people aren't being discriminated and being forced to go through something that they don't want to do, that they don't need to, and that they shouldn't be going through. And quite frankly, being told that they're not good enough and that who they are needs to be changed through some sort of procedure or therapy process. What we need to do is have a federal ban on conversion therapy, and making sure that we're then also providing resources to our LGBTQ youth, and letting them know, hey, we love who you are, right? Who you are is a great person. And I think this also then goes back to, as we're banning conversion therapy, making sure that we're also teaching proper history, right? Making sure that we're standing up leaders of the LGBTQ community so that young people can see that some of our most important and thoughtful leaders in this country and around the world were from the LGBTQ community. Making sure that we're standing up role models, and whether it's athletes or artists or whoever, politicians, whoever, right? Being able to say, hey, look, this can be you, right? These people have made significant and incredible impact on all of our lives. And there is nothing wrong with you. Who you are is a great and incredible person, and we welcome you. And the more that our states fight that, the more damage we're doing to a lot of young people, for no good reason. And every time we try to pass these laws on the state level, it also tells a lot of people, don't come here, right? That we're not a welcoming place, and it makes it really hard for us to create jobs, bring investment, and keep people, right? One of the biggest problems Wisconsin has right now is its brain drain, right? People are leaving, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're trying to ban who can play in what sport and all of that. We need to show that we're a welcoming place for everyone, and that starts with a federal law on conversion, on banning conversion therapy, and making sure that we're propping up and teaching the history and the incredible work that a lot of our LGBTQ leaders have done.
So thank you for your comments around that question, and sharing your plans for really making sure that at a federal level, we're protecting our folks and banning conversion therapy and sending a message to folks outside the state that we are welcoming. I do want to ask you, along the lines of, something that our LGBTQ plus community members have fought for and been incredible leaders on, is the Equality Act, right? Is marriage equality and something more all-encompassing, such as the Equality Act. And so that's what the next question is about. So 7 years after marriage equality became a reality nationwide, over half of US states could still deny LGBTQ plus Americans basic freedoms like the right to rent a home or the ability to receive public goods and services simply because of who they love or who they are. The Equality Act aims to ensure basic freedoms and protections for every American in every state. More than 5,000 associations, organizations, faith leaders, and companies have endorsed the Equality Act. If you are elected to the US Senate, will you co-sponsor the Equality Act?
Not only will I co-sponsor the Equality Act, I'm going to do everything in my power, and I'm going to make sure that it gets passed, right? This starts with making sure that we ban the filibuster and get rid of the filibuster so that we can pass the agenda that voters put us in. Look, we need to pass the Equality Act. We need to, codify and make sure that same-sex marriage and that you have the right to marry anyone you want, right? I think what we've seen with Roe is that the right to privacy is under attack, and the rights that we thought we had under previous Supreme Court decisions now might not be there. And the best way that we can make sure that we protect is through legislation, right? One of the things that I think sometimes we relied too much on were the courts, right? We looked at the courts to handle things that we didn't want to touch legislatively. And we can't be scared of these issues, right? We could have codified Roe 10, 20 years ago. We could have codified, same-sex marriage 10, 20 years ago. And we didn't, and we hoped the courts would take care of it for us. And now we're seeing kind of the the consequences of those decisions. And so what I would want to do when I get to the Senate is make sure that we're making these things federal law, right? We're not leaving it up to the courts to decide or anything like that, but that we're making sure that the Equality Act, that the right to marry who you want is federal law and can't be banned or taken away by anyone. Because again, the more we do that, as I said, the more we're showing the world that we're not a welcoming country, that we don't believe in the freedoms that we espouse, and that we're telling people that who they are is not okay. And that's not good for us morally. It's not good for us as an economy, and it's not good for our leadership around the world. And so the Equality Act, I think, is one of the top things that we need to get passed. And not only would I want to be a co-sponsor on it, I'd want to make sure that I want to make sure that that we put it at the top of our priority list, because too often in Washington we see people just talking about fighting, right? And just being a co-sponsor is looked at as an accomplishment, and that's what I'm frustrated with. Is that we say, well, I co-sponsored this, so I tried. No, we need results, right? We need these things to get passed. Your job as a senator is to pass legislation. And if you're not passing it, then you're not doing your job. And so for me, it's not just about co-sponsoring it. It's about doing whatever it takes to get it done.
Definitely powerful words. This really moves us into our next question around intersectionality when it comes to protections for LGBTQI plus folks. So Black people who identify as members of the LGBTQI plus community face higher rates of police brutality, incarceration, domestic violence and sexual assault, poverty, mental health crisis, and medical discrimination than their white and POC counterparts. Addressing these disparities requires a multifaceted approach that takes into account the intersecting identities held by Black LGBTQI plus community members. How would you ensure that your support for LGBTQ plus rights is intersectional? For instance, Black transgender women are among the most victimized, marginalized, and criminalized members of our population. What steps would you take to improve the lives of those who are marginalized in multiple ways?
Yeah, I think, what's so fascinating and I think great about this question and the way I look at this is, the way we've kind of, told this narrative, over the last decades, the narrative of LGBTQ activism has been through like a white male cisgender lens, right? I don't want to downplay the importance of, someone like Harvey Milk, but we've never really told the full story and the full comprehensive story. And we've largely disregarded kind of the foundation of modern day activism and advances that, people like, Stonewall, Sylvia Rivera, and people like that have done. And so for me, what I think we need to do is, one, bring more people to the table, right? As we are looking at any piece of legislation, we need to make sure that we have voices from all parts of all communities, making sure that they're at the table and talking about this, making sure that we're getting input from everyone so that we know, hey, are we doing something that is marginalizing you? And maybe in a way that I wouldn't know because I'm not part of that community, right? So we've got to.
Alex, I want to let you know you've got 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay, sorry. So, for me, this is about making sure that not only are we bringing people to the table, like I said, but it also depends on who's staffing, right? Who are we bringing into government and working in these jobs to help write these laws, to help make sure that our members and our representatives are hearing from everyone, right? It's not just about talking about the activists. It's also about making sure that our Senate staff, our White House staffs, all are having fair representation. So for me, it's going to be about making sure that we're talking to the activists, but also pushing not just my staff, but the rest of Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans and House and Democrats and Republicans, but also administrations, to make sure that the people who are writing these laws, writing the guidelines and everything, and who are working and have seats at the table, come from all different backgrounds.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, for your time tonight. Thanks for answering our questions. And I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'd like to welcome our fifth and final candidate, Tom Nelson.
All right, I'm coming to you live from, I think it's the First Presbyterian Church in Waukesha County. So we just got done talking to the Waukesha County Dems. So it's
Great.
good to be here. It's good to be here,
Great to have you.
virtually and otherwise.
Could you take a moment to introduce yourself before we hop into the questions?
Yep. Okay. So Tom Nelson, I'm the Outagamie County Executive, which is the greater Appleton area. I've been county executive for 3 terms. It's the 5th largest county. I run 23 departments, 1,300 employees, providing every service area you can think of. Before that, I was in the state assembly also for 3 terms and served 1 term as majority leader when the Democrats were in charge, which was a long time ago, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks for introducing yourself, and thank you so much for being here tonight, Tom. The first question that you chose is actually a yes or no question, so you have ample time and room to go into the details about this. So I'll just begin and you can go ahead and answer how you see fit. So it reads, 7 years after marriage equality became a reality nationwide, over half of US states could still deny LGBTQ plus Americans basic freedoms like the right to rent a home or the ability to receive public goods and services simply because of who they love or who they are. The Equality Act aims to ensure basic freedoms and protections for every American in every state. More than 5,000 associations, organizations, faith leaders, and companies have endorsed the Equality Act. If you are elected to the US Senate, will you co-sponsor the Equality Act?
I mean, I'm going to co-sponsor the Equality Act for all the reasons you said, though. But I think for me, this means this is a special issue for me because it was one of the first issues that I worked with when I was on the state assembly. So 16 years ago, long before the Supreme Court decision, in 2006, that was significant because 2004, 2006 were the first 2 years that the Republican Party used the marriage amendment ban, the marriage ban amendment, to try to win legislative seats. And so Wisconsin's term was in 2006. And I was a freshman legislator running for re-election in a pretty red district. And I voted against the ban. And I voted against the ban despite the fact that party leaders said, this is 16 years ago, that you should vote against it because you come from a conservative district and they're going to vote you out when we need you here. I said, no, this is the right thing to do. The right thing to do is oppose this. And as it turned out, the bad news is the amendment passed in my assembly district 2-1. But I won re-election 2-1. And so you can draw all kinds of lessons from that. So when people say, well, these are controversial issues, you can't get Republican support, you can't win in red areas if you support measures like the Equality Act, I'm living proof that that is not the case. And so to be able to see this through my 17 years of public service, to go from a very ugly issue on a defensive posture, that there are quite a few Democrats that voted for the marriage ban amendment. And there were a lot of rank and file Democrats that voted for it on election day, to see us in this position where we are going on offense, where we are expanding the franchise, we are expanding these rights in as many ways as possible. I mean, that's something that takes generations. And to see that this could be done within a generation between 2006 and 2023, it would be an honor. It would be an honor and a privilege to be in the United States Senate, to be in a position to co-sponsor that legislation.
Wow. Definitely speaking to your experiences coming from a conservative district. This next question is about intersectionality, within the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. So Black people who identify as members of the LGBTQI plus community face higher rates of police brutality, incarceration, domestic violence and sexual assault, poverty, mental health crisis, and medical discrimination than their white and POC counterparts. Addressing these disparities requires a multifaceted approach that takes into account the intersecting identities held by Black LGBTQI community members. How would you ensure that your support for LGBTQ plus rights is intersectional? For instance, Black transgender women are among the most victimized, marginalized, and criminalized members of our population. What steps would you take to improve the lives of those who are marginalized in multiple ways?
Well, I think this should not be an issue that is predicated with how do you make it an intersectional issue. I think that's how it is to begin with. I think if you don't address these measures and these challenges, if you don't approach the Equality Act, if you don't, in a way that you described, I don't think it's going to be successful. And I think that you're going to let a lot of people fall through the cracks for those examples. So I think moving forward, when you talk about measures like the Equality Act, when you are making sure that all different segments, people, whatever the background, whatever it might be, that they're going to get the support, it's important to know how all of these pieces connect each other. And that's what I've seen over the last 17 years. Just today, going to a meeting in the courthouse, we had this graphic up, and it talked about 44% of the people who identify as LGBTQ have mental health issues. 44%. I mean, if you're looking just at how you should allocate your time and resources to these public policy challenges, when you see that this one particular group, this one particular community, if nationally it's like it's still very bad, it's like 18 or 19%, but when you're talking 44%, there's something wrong. And not only have we failed to address that in a comprehensive manner, it would be malpractice if we went forward not understanding just how comprehensive an issue this is and how our approaches in the past that were not intersectional have failed. Thus, the only way that you can approach these issues and to be successful is in that way.
You know, those are definitely powerful words, especially considering all the attacks that Black POC and other races of LGBTQI plus folks are facing. It's no surprise that there's such high instances of mental health issues. And that really leads us to our next question around these attacks by our elected officials, right? And really talking about how the fact that there's been more than 300 anti-LGBTQI plus bills that have been proposed during the 2022 legislative session. In a March article for NBC, Chase Strugio, the Deputy Director for Transgender Justice at the ACLU and HIV Project stated, it's important for people to pause and think about what is happening, especially in the healthcare context, because what we're seeing is that the state should have the authority to declare a population of people so undesirable that their medical care that they need to survive becomes a crime. So how should Washington be responding to the rash of anti-LGBTQI plus, especially anti-transgender bills in states and around the country, and hasn't been doing enough?
Well, I think what we need to do is we need to codify these protections, codify these rights, as I think what the Equality Act wants to do. The strategy is to go on offense and not just defend and not just respond to these dozens and dozens of these really ugly bills and what they're doing to the communities. And this is something that this is not just a reflection. This doesn't just affect people of color and people who identified as LGBTQ. But what these right-wing legislators are missing is how this reflects on our society and how this makes us look. How do we explain this to our children? How do we explain this when we're trying to lead the world, when this country is at war and people still look to the United States as a beacon of hope, and they see these legislatures putting together 300 bills that are demonizing, and not just people in general, but kids and children. mean, for shame. So what you need to do is we need to have a working majority in the US Senate. And the majority, the working majority in the US Senate goes through Wisconsin. We have to win this seat. And I think I'm a very strong candidate for all the reasons and discussions we have right now. That I come from the right part of the state. I've been elected 6 times. At the same time, too, I know my values. I know my core. I stick to my guns. And these are issues that might not be popular certain times in certain parts of the state, though, but we have to do it because that's the right thing to do. So we have to win Wisconsin. I think we've got a good candidate in Pennsylvania. So then we win Pennsylvania and then Wisconsin, and we hold our seats, and then it's 52, and it's 52-48. Now we're in a position where we can get rid of the filibuster. We can do things like we can start reversing the trend of appointing these right-wing conservative justices. And then I think just following in the footsteps of what we want to do in Codify and Roe, that we can do this for any number of issues. And so by dealing at the federal level, we're not going to have to play this defensive game state by state by state, but we can approach the same strategy we did with the civil rights movement in the 1960s, is to get the federal protections and make sure those states, red states, conservative states that don't like this, tough. We're all Americans. We all respect each other. Everyone should be guaranteed these basic rights. People should not be living in fear. We should not have an entire community for which 44%, half the community members are suffering from mental health. There is a connection. There is a cause and effect. When you talk about these legislators, when these legislatures that are just pounding away on people of color, people who identify as LGBTQ, it is no wonder. It's not surprising in that respect. It's not respect that like half of the members who identify as LGBTQ have mental health issues, and that reflects poorly on everyone. And Democrats, we have to make it a priority. When we get a working majority in Washington, this has to be a top priority, and it will be for me.
I mean, you mentioned all of the legislative attacks on LGBTQI plus folks and particularly youth, and that really speaks to this next question. Around conversion therapy, and not only attacks, but also inaction, right, by our elected officials. So it talks about reparative or conversion therapy, which is a dangerous practice that targets LGBTQ youth and seeks to change their sexual or gender identities. According to a recent report by the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law, an estimated 20,000 LGBTQ minors in states without protections will be subjected to conversion therapy by a licensed healthcare professional if state officials fail to act. In April 2018, national organizations representing millions of licensed medical and mental health care professionals, educators, and child welfare advocates declared their support for legislative protections against conversion therapy. So my question to you is, how will you prioritize ending the incredibly abusive and harmful practice of conversion therapy? And what are your plans to support LGBTQ plus youth who, as a result of discrimination and rejection, face significantly higher rates of homelessness, mental illness, addiction, and other challenges than their straight and cisgender peers? And also, you got 2 minutes to answer this and wrap up.
Okay. So, and this is a very important question, more than 2 minutes though, but I'll do the best I can. All of these issues are national issues, and they're national issues because these are human rights issues. It's not limited to red states or blue states. It's not limited to certain cities and counties and so forth. The questions that have been asked tonight make a very strong, compelling reason for why we need to hold on to the US Senate. And that means we have to win this seat. I believe I'm well positioned to beat Ron Johnson. And when I go to Washington, we're going to have the fundamentals to be able to get rid of the filibuster and to have democracy in the US Senate, which we don't have right now because you need to have 60 votes, which in democracy doesn't make any sense. And then we can start prioritizing these issues. So then LGBTQ youth in a deep red state like Oklahoma or Arkansas, and just because their representatives don't support them, just because their governor or US senator demonizes them, they will have an ally. an ally, hopefully, in this seat in Wisconsin and 49 others across the country that will support them with the protections and the rights that they deserve. And we have to do that at a national level. And Wisconsin can do it not just for Wisconsinites, but for the entire country, because this seat, it's Wisconsin's US Senate seat, but in some respects, this is America's Senate seat, because this is the path to win the US Senate in a working majority and do all the great reforms that I know everyone here wants to see done, and I will do it.
Well, Tom, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank all of the candidates that joined us tonight. Adam Murphy, Mandela Barnes, Sarah Godlewski, Alex Lasry, and you, Tom Nelson, for joining us. And as we wrap up this candidate forum, we here at Human Rights Campaign and all the other sponsors of this forum hope that you all got as much out of it as we did and got a lot more information and can go ahead and go to the polls as informed voters in the fall. And we'd like to again thank everyone for joining and watching, and we hope you all have a great rest of your evening.